So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the technique of carving a woodcut. Here is a tattoo flash sheet I'm working on. I like to keep one of these rubber mats underneath it to keep it from sliding around. These are just kitchen cupboard liner mats. And here I'm using a strop. This is like an old scrap of leather glued to a piece of wood. And you put some honing compound on it and then just run the blade across it 20 to 30 times before you start carving. So you don't have to sharpen every time you carve, you can just hone. And it's also good to have some wood glue, just in case you make a mistake. Have some regular standard wood glue handy. You can find the piece if you accidentally carve something out and stick it back in. But if you're careful, you won't need to use it. But especially when you're starting out, it's really handy to have around, and it takes off some of the pressure. Now when I start carving, I like to carve the larger exterior shapes first, especially if I'm carving just like this figure on an empty background. I think it's a good idea to go around and outline the area where you're carving first so that you're sure that you don't kind of accidentally carve outside of the area you're supposed to. I find that if it's already carved away, I'm much more careful and I'm much more respectful of the border of the shape. And then these interior ones, I'm using this flick motion. And this flick motion is at the end of the carve, and it helps to get the shape of that end part without having to turn the block around and carve at it from the other side. And I think I'll do another video at some point about this technique. But I would suggest to practice this flick movement on some scrap areas because it takes a little bit of getting used to. But if you're not comfortable with that movement yet, you can also flip the block around and you can start from what would be the end point. So it's easier to start the carving motion than it is to finish the carving motion without going over your lines. And here still just carving the outline of the form. And in a moment I'll start going into the interior of this arm. The fingers on this glove are a good shape for carving from the outside to the inside because the roundness of the fingers is the same general shape as the gouge, as the carving tool. And so can start from that outside part. Start shallow and push deeper as you go in. And so the tips of the fingers are a little bit narrower. And if you start carving shallower, you can, as the tool pushes into the wood, it will get wider. So the gouge is sort of a U shape, and if you think of the letter U, at the trough of the U is the narrowest part, and as you get higher and higher out of that trough, it gets wider and wider. So it's the same as the carving tool. So if you need to make a smaller shape, you just don't push the tool into the wood quite so much, and if you want a wider shape, you can push the tool in deeper. So here I've carved away the white space in the middle there, where the light is hitting the arm. And then I've come at it from each side, starting shallow and pushing the tool in deeper, so you can get this nice feathering. So when I have a shape like this kind of a form, I will always carve out the inside area. I'll define my highlight, and then I'll carve the shadows into the highlight, kind of from the outside in. And so especially if the shadow is darker on the sides, on the edges, and it gets lighter towards the middle. So you can use that technique of starting shallow and pushing the tool in deeper as you get closer to the center of the mark. So I'm carving into the trough that I've carved out in the middle. When you're carving into an empty area, there's an advantage and a disadvantage. So when you're carving into the empty area, it's important not to push too hard, because once you clear the edge and you're in empty space, the tool can tend to get away from you and it can go sliding really quickly. across the trough into the other side, and then you'll end up carving something out that you didn't want to. But if you're careful when you come into the trough, if you keep pushing down and you're not pushing too hard, the tool will just go into the floor of the trough, and you will keep more control that way. The tool's less likely to get away from you. In the open white spaces, it's important to make sure that you carve everything out. Don't leave any peaks in the empty space, because later on when you go to ink, it might catch some of that ink, and it's a pain. You'll have to either wipe it off or go back in and carve the area that's been inked. And that can be tricky to do, especially if there's ink over the whole surface of the area you're carving. You'll get your hands in the gouging tool all inky. So that very fine line I just carved to the side of the chest pack, I used a very shallow move for that. I did not push down hard at all, just catching the narrowest part of the trough of the U-gouge, and that can help you get the really fine details and the really thin white spaces. And here I'm outlining this middle shape. I'm establishing the border. It might seem more intuitive to carve out the middle part first because it's the smaller part, but I think that carving the surrounding area keeps you more sort of faithful to the original mark, less likely to have less likely to go over your outline for that middle rectangle shape. And I'm making sure that my corners are nice and sharp. So it's a little bit tricky to get nice sharp corners. So if you come at it from behind the corner with the shallow part of the tool, you usually get a much more squared off corner. So with these shapes, coming in to the very end, stopping, and then turning the tool from the other side, just to make sure that I keep those nice crisp corners. So this is the alternative to the flicking technique. If you're less confident, or if the shape is really important and you want to be absolutely sure that you get a nice corner to it or a nice finishing point, you can come up right to the edge, stop, and then turn the block around, or turn your hand around. And here, carving the circle. The circles are surprisingly easy to carve. Carve the outline of it first, the outside shape, and then for the inside, you just keep the carving tool more perpendicular to the wood and just kind of twist it around and let the shape of the U-gouge make the circle. If you're consistent with the way you turn the tool, then you should be able to get a nice circle. I'll be doing more videos on these specific techniques in the future. This is just a general overview of the thoughts behind the carving technique. If there are any specific techniques or any specific questions you want to know more about, please let me know in the comments. You can also come and watch my live stream on Twitch every Tuesday at 10 a.m. and Friday at 2 p.m. That's Taiwan time. And I'm happy to discuss it in more detail, any of these techniques. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.